Hi. The end at the beginning, or the beginning at the end. I just went to edit this and realised I hadn't really given any sort of introduction to it. So, in this talk today, it's a direct follow-on from my talk about logical positivism or science versus religion, which I posted a week ago. I should put a link in, shouldn't I? And in that, I talked through, well, I've added to this, but I talked about, I've been building up to this over the last series of talks, where we've got rationalism and empiricism as two main forces in the story of epistemology. And that is how we know things and what can be known. So this talk kind of only makes sense in light of what's gone before. And most particularly the last one, but then also the one on Descartes and Hume and Kant play a part. Even going back to Aristotle or Socrates, yes, and Plato. The whole thing builds. It's a story. But this, what's about to follow, that turned into that, I wouldn't just take this, well, you can have a go, but this talk really is on the back of those other ones. And so I'm not in a position to do a full introduction here or make any sense of it. So if you're actually interested in my thoughts about this, or you've got some understanding already of what rationalism and empiricism and a priori and a posteriori knowledge are and so forth, then you'll be fine. But if you have no background and you're sort of turning up here and this is a first go, maybe it'd be better to head back to some of the earlier ones, because this one's really starting from a position of assuming that you've got some grasp on what was on this board before I added to it. So, with that said, welcome to take 2 of my attempt to talk about Wittgenstein. I finished my last talk, which has gone surprisingly well, I thought, given the perceived potential dryness of the topic. Anyway, I started trying to talk about Wittgenstein. I finished off my last one saying that was my next talk. And yeah, it's tricky. Wittgenstein's a big topic. So I'll see if I can make a bit more sense of it this turn. At this point here, we got our, really, I think we could sum up. People want to have some reason to believe that they know something. I think that's but Hume and what you get when you start looking at what goes on here, and the fact that Popper was talking about falsifying rather than confirming or verifying. Everything that we have in science potentially could be falsified. It's our best guess now, and if we're to take the foundation of this seriously, it's explicitly saying we can only know once we've observed. And of course, science doesn't really want that. Science wants laws. Science wants to be over here with really our knowledge before experience. But if we take its roots seriously over here and in empiricism and only knowing after the fact, then we don't have that. Really, I think that the problem we've got here is that if you look at where this is coming from, they're not entitled to this side of the column, but we want it. We desperately want it. And I found myself here. I found myself unconvinced by this side and arguments that there's a revelation that we just have to accept or something, because if you take, I just saw how many different religions are there and how many different sects are there in religions. to say one of them was correct over all others, and just go with that. I didn't feel it was. I couldn't do that. But I felt that the power of Hume, I felt here, was he really showed that the best we can do is get on with it. You know, he's pragmatic, sort of. Well, we can't know, but let's just get on with it because we have to. And I'm not really, you know, it was a great thing to hear, and I found some real solace in it, but it's not really a strong position. So then this is when I encountered Wittgenstein, and I read On Certainty, and it's all in the title, On Certainty. The problem here is everyone's after, well, both sides over here. Let's write it here. You know, both sides want knowledge. And what's knowledge? It's something that you say, I can't be wrong. And I don't think either side are entitled to this claim. So then do we end up with what's philosophical skepticism is a position. I don't know whether anyone is actually a philosophical skeptic, but it's a position that is argued against. So, you know, it's how do you know we're not a brain in a vat? How can we know that we're not a computer simulation or, you know, those sorts of Matrix or whatever. There's so many movies and stories written around that kind of plot. How can we know we don't? How can we know that that's not the case? I don't think we can. So what are we left with? And I felt I went through a period in my probably early 30s where I really kept saying over and over again, but I could be wrong all the time, and it was probably tiring for those around me, and it was certainly tiring for me. Then I hit Wittgenstein, and what's the difference? Well, he says this is a mistake. That we not only can we not know, but often claims to know are misplaced. Now, the first thing that he says in Uncertainty opens up. There's a guy, G.E. Moore, who was a philosopher, and there's external world skepticism, which is, the Matrix and brain in the vat type thing. How do we know we're not just trapped in our head and there is? How do we know there's an external world? How do we know it's not all just here, inside? We're stuck inside, and how can we know that there is a world out there? And Moore tried to put forward an argument. He would stand in front of groups of people and say, "How do I know there's a world? I'll tell you. Well, there's something I know about the world, and that's here is a hand." And hold up a hand. And what he's saying is, "Tell me I'm wrong. Like, all you people out there, you're sitting there. I say here's a hand. Tell me I'm wrong." And he says, "I'll tell you another thing I know. Here's another hand." So he's trying to put that as some kind of foundation, really. And then from this idea of his two hands, he says, "I'll tell you other things I know." And Wittgenstein starts on certainty, which is actually just a collection of numbered statements, which is how he wrote, that are not really a formal and logical, direct sort of, here's my premises, here's my conclusion. They're just these aphorisms or interesting statements, and they're just collected. And you have to kind of infer what he thinks from when you hear enough of them. You get an idea of where he's. In fact, he says, I keep saying I can't say what I want to say, but if I throw enough darts, you'll see where they cluster. And that's what I'm trying to say. I can't hit it. Every word, every time I try to speak it, I don't get it. But if I just say enough times, you'll see where it's clustering, and that's what I'm trying to say. Interestingly, he didn't write that to be published. He didn't believe in publishing by that stage. And it was just things he wrote for himself, and they were published posthumously. But anyway, he said, if Moore does know that here is a hand, I'll grant him all the rest. And I think he's right. If you could know that, if you had that foundation like Descartes with his, if he really did know that I think, therefore I exist, and then could get some meat onto that, if you could get something from that allowed you to move back out into the world, all well and good. But I don't think Descartes got out of the cogito, and I don't think that Moore holding up a hand, I haven't talked about Bishop Berkeley, but actually he's an empiricist that actually was defending theism. But there's always exceptions that prove the rule. But people used to try and refute Berkeley in a similar kind of way. He claimed that there was no external world, that we're all ideas in God's mind, and people went, what the? And apparently someone said, oh, how do I refute him? I refute him thus, and kicked a rock. But if we're all ideas in God's mind, if you kick a rock, that happens in God's idea of what happened, and so it proves nothing. So rock kicking is a kind of an expression that gets used, and I think that Moore's attempt with external world, here's a hand, was kicking a rock. If Berkeley is right, and we're all ideas in God's mind, then that's going to look like it looks like, and it makes no difference. But where Wittgenstein goes in a different direction to what I think has been done before, well, in many ways, and this is a first look from my perspective of what I encountered at this point. There's so much more to what Wittgenstein was on about, and in fact there's two stages of Wittgenstein. The early Wittgenstein, who apparently his first Tractatus, it's called the Tractatus, I can't remember what it's called, anyway, was instrumental in setting up the logical positivists. He influenced them, and then they got a bit of a flurry, and then Wittgenstein rethought and thought that doesn't even make sense, and more or less came up with the arguments that destroyed them. So it's fascinating that he was sort of the inspiration and the death. But anyway, the thing that struck me is he just said this is a mistake. Firstly, we can't know, okay, but saying we can't know is also a mistake. I mean, no means I can't be wrong. It means that, and he said that you can see the mistake of saying I know that when you say I thought I knew, because we've all had to do that. And then you have to just ask the question, well, every time I say I know, might it be one of those times when I end up having to say I thought I knew? And so he sort of said to say I know is really just expressing how strongly you believe something. But he asks, what about if we talk about certainty instead? And it's different. It might seem subtle, but if you say I know that, and you have to say I thought I knew, there's something wrong there. It's obvious that you made a mistake. But if you say I was certain that, and now I'm not certain, certainty is more of it is explicitly not saying I know, it says I'm completely convinced, which is different. You can be convinced of something and admit later on that you're no longer convinced. And so moving to certainty, he says, in a court of law, wouldn't it be better if we said every time I'm certain that rather than I know that? Because how many times have people not lied in the stand in a court, but been shown to be wrong? Whereas, and they can say, well, yeah, I'm certain. And then you come and say, well, you were certain, but are you certain now? And then, well, no, not anymore. So it might seem subtle, but to me, just this idea of saying I'm certain that rather than I know that, it gives you And certainty isn't all or nothing. It's not a Boolean. It's not, true, false, or right, wrong. It's, I am, how certain are you? I'm this certain. How certain you are? I'm this certain. How certain are you? I'm this certain, And if we put this beautiful square, if we put that here, and if this is, 100% here, well, you believe that fairly strongly. But there might even be things that you say, I can't see any reason why I would change my mind on that. But it could turn out that there's some piece of knowledge, some piece of, not knowledge, some piece of information that would cause you to go, I was certain, but now I'm not. But he goes even further, and he says, rather than claiming, or even talking about knowing, like he said, I know that this person's sick. I don't know this person's sick. I don't know. Well, how about we just say this person's sick? So I look into his eyes, I see his pain. So I don't say I know that this person's sick. To put the I know in this place is just a misplaced. Just say this person's sick. And in some circumstances you might have good reason to doubt. Someone might have very strong reason pretending to be sick, in which case you might go to some considerable effort to verify that that is actually what's going on. But really what he talks about is, in a situation that you're in, I made myself, my wife went off and had dinner with a friend, and left me to have to defend for myself. So I grabbed stuff from the fridge, and I made a hamburger. What a chef I am. But I didn't, apart from just making sure that everything was within date, I wasn't checking to see whether there was poison in anything. I just assumed that, here in Australia we've got good health standards, and if it's in date and it's been in the fridge, it should be fine. But if there are circumstances where I would absolutely be checking that, there are some countries where they don't have the same standards, and you see pictures of meat out without any refrigeration and flies all over it, and you may have a really good hard look before you choose to eat some of that. Or if you're in a position where someone is, you're aware someone's actually trying to kill you, you'd be making sure. So what he's saying is, how hard do I try and find out or prove something? Well, it depends on what's at stake. Someone says, where's your wife? I say, well, she's in the room above me, being careful not to stomp around because it sounds like a skirt of something, that our floor resonates. So she's sitting up there diligently on the lounge trying not to walk around. Do I know that? Well, I haven't heard any footsteps and whatever. So I don't know, but I'm pretty certain. But if there was, there are circumstances where I wouldn't be certain. And there are circumstances, if I had reason to believe that someone might be trying to do something dastardly, and I'd be making sure as much as I could. But at the moment, there's no reason to doubt that she's there. There's no reason to be concerned that she's not, and I see no reason that anyone would be trying to abduct her or anything like that. So what he's doing is putting nuance into this. Like he uses phrases like everything speaks for it, nothing speaks against it. And so rather than getting locked into this, I know, no you don't, it's we move around in the world and we accept things. We really do. We might claim that we don't know something. We might claim to be skeptical, but the sorts of standard things that get pointed out in philosophy classes. I don't know that there's a chair, someone says, because, philosophically it's possible that there isn't, But then outside of the class, I say, can you go and get the chairs and set them up for the tutorial? And people just go and get the chairs and put them out. That shows what they believe. And then you sit in those chairs and talk philosophy, and people say, oh, I don't know if there's a chair, as they sit in it. I've just got a thump, thump, thump. Well, in a very interesting turn of events, I just heard a thump, thump, thump upstairs, and I thought, oh dear, something's just happened. I wonder what my wife wanted to tell me. And she just saw a mouse. So the herd of wildebeest just stomped around. I guess I might have left a little of that in before. Anyway, so for me, I don't know, maybe you got to be where I was for this to be so significant, but I'd been stuck on this. And suddenly, moving to certainty rather than knowledge, all these sort of issues that I was struggling with, certainty, yeah, okay, I can look at how certain I am of these things, but certainty isn't knowledge. It just expresses what I think. But he did more than this. I had, if you watch earlier, would have been my Descartes video, I talked about the wrench that I had in workshops when I was working a lathe, and I reading like a big computer-driven lathe, and sometimes you had 40 minutes of a cut on a big part that you had to wait out, or you'd just be doing lots and lots of repetitious work, and you could read for a couple of minutes in each operation. And I went from this world of Descartes and Cartesian doubt. Is there a world? Is there an evil deceiver who's just trying to fool me? All that sort of stuff. And then I just flicked when I engaged with the lathe, and suddenly there weren't these possibilities. It was just, I'm going to solve this problem, and it's all down to heat or flex or whatever. And I went through that in that Descartes, I think. But Wittgenstein talked about language games. He talked, a lot of the stuff he dealt with was to do with language. And again, this is not doing him justice, and I'll come back and look at other aspects, but just looking at, in relation to this issue that we've been building and my journey, this is the stuff that hit me with Wittgenstein when I first encountered him. He talks about language games, and we all participate in different language games. And what he said is, nothing is beyond doubt, but we can't doubt everything at the same time. So the way I understand this, this is where it really helped me with my problem with when I'm reading philosophy and then I'm on the lathe. When you are in the workshop and you're working a lathe, that's one language game, and it's got its rules. And the rules include certainties. They're things you don't doubt. When I'm in a lab, in a science lab, and working with an instrument, I used to work on these Fourier transform spectrometers, and they depended on the speed of light being constant. And if it wasn't, then they didn't work. So much electronics and so forth that we deal with, it makes no sense to doubt Ohm's law. With building bridges and things, it doesn't make sense to doubt, that Newton's levers make sense and things like that. Just in that realm. But if you're in a physics lab at CERN, the whole thing you might be trying to look at is the speed of light constant? So when you're over in this game playing the game I was playing with spectroscopy, the speed of light is fixed and Ohm's law applies and so forth. When you're over here at CERN and you're doing particle physics and you're working on a Large Hadron Collider or something, that's a different language game. But not only that, when you're in a language game of philosophy, it's a different game. And an example, I don't know whether it's his or where I got it from, or I don't know, but this is an example I've been thinking about, I've used a lot. If you were putting on a chess tournament and you weren't trying to be part of an international chess community, you're just putting it on for your own entertainment. While you're planning it, you could decide that you're going to allow a bishop to move like a knight under this particular circumstance. And you could have a big discussion about, does it make sense if you know, with a committee or your mates who are putting it on. And then you write up the rules and you say, oh, but for our tournament, there's this special case. And while you're thinking about it, everything's up for grabs. But now you've set down, you've written a list of rules, all these rules. And it includes this thing with a bishop. Now people start the competition. They've signed a little thing to say that they're going to abide by the rules. And someone says, you can't do that with a bishop. And it says, well, if you read the rules, and you made it pretty clear, you can. Well, that's not the case. You say, well, actually it is. And in this particular competition, it's just the way it is. And no discussion will be entered into. That's it. You know, deal with it. But then the competition's over, and you get back together with your mates, and you say, what did you think about that idea with the bishop? Did that work? Did it do anything interesting? And now we've gone from, while you're planning, everything's up for grabs. You write the rules, you have the competition. It's written in stone. And then you come back at the end and you think about it, and it's all up for grabs again. And so whether something, you know, basically, if it makes no sense to doubt something, if it doesn't serve any purpose, if it just stops you, then don't doubt. But of course, it's tricky because, you know, it's not saying there is no place for doubt. There absolutely is place for doubt. But there's no place for doubting everything. And so philosophical skepticism is about doubting everything. It's about saying, I don't know anything about the world. I've got no claim to make about anything in the world. And you can't prove, there's no evidence you can give me that convinces me that I'm wrong. And that's skepticism, which is ironic, isn't it? That the only thing you know is that you don't know anything. But instead of that, there are, at any moment, certain things that you take to be certain. And there are other things that are up for doubt, for discussion. But sitting here, the thing that is certain may be the very thing that when you're over here, you're explicitly doubting. So it's not a case of anything is beyond doubt. Everything is subject to doubt, but not simultaneously. And for me, that idea suddenly made sense of my wrestle all those years before. Actually, at the time when I got there, it wasn't that many years. It was all years ago now, but back then it was only a few years ago, or maybe almost contemporary. But yeah, because I was still working in machine shops at that time. But anyway, it allowed me to think, well, I'm playing one game when I'm reading the philosophy here, and I'm doubting all these things. And I'm playing a different game here, and I'm doubting these things, but I'm holding these things as certain here and not there. And it meant that wrench that I had when I moved from one to the other was gone. I could just say, I'm switching, playing a different game now. I'm switching, playing a different game now, and the certainties changed, and the things that could be doubted changed. And that as an idea, that as a way of getting around this problem of knowledge. I think that the problem of knowledge, if you stick to these rules, that problem persists. But if you move into this idea, and I've not written Wittgenstein anywhere, but I'll put him down maybe here. And he kind of encompasses or disrupts all of this and breaks down this kind of Boolean it's this or that, and it's all I think focused in on this desire for knowledge, and how, when you break all of this down, it's all about knowledge, but it's, if you stick in these frameworks, this is really hard, and everyone wants it. But it's suddenly, for me at least, when I move to certainty, looking at certainty rather than knowledge, it kind of dissolved a lot of these things. And really, I've been, there's a lot more to say about Wittgenstein, but when I got to this point where I framed things in this way, and I keep going like this, and I noticed in the last one I was tapping it all the time, and I vowed I wouldn't do it. But when I got to here and I started thinking about certainty and language games, this problem basically stopped being a problem. And I guess at that point, I got to a point, at this point, I kind of felt I had a framework that I did it again. I had a framework that I could function with. And Hume helped me get more night's sleep. I used to lie awake since I was maybe 10, worrying about this sort of stuff, particularly, am I going to hell or not? But I was okay with this. But what I really became aware of is that satisfied me, and I felt kind of good about it. But none of this that we've been talking all the way through, people are influenced by it without knowing it, and culturally these ideas are passed in and they become part of our culture, and people accept them without knowing that that's what they're accepting. There's you just see this science. Everything has to be evidence-based and scientific and whatever. And so overwhelmingly, at least in Western culture that I'm in, the majority of people tacitly and unknowingly just they've inherited this idea that science is their way to truth. And there's sort of a suspicion of people that don't agree with it. And this debate, I went to a debate between John Lennox, who's an apologist for Christianity, and Michael Shermer, who was actually wrote, I don't know if he still does, but he wrote the column The Skeptic for Scientific American. And actually, if you want to check, reduce your doubt about the veracity of this story, it's actually that debate is on YouTube, or at least it was when I looked not that long ago. And I went into a JCar, which is an electronics shop, just after I'd been on it, and someone said, "You were at this debate." One of the guys who worked there. And what? And I saw it on YouTube. So if you look up Michael Shermer and John Lennox in Australia, probably, I don't know, 1990s sometime, at some point you see me in the crowd. But that was a fascinating night, because people turn up and they were wearing their T-shirts. And there's the ones over here, and they're saying, God is dead and science is king, and, Christians are idiots. And all these other people with the cross and Jesus saves and whatever. And they'd picked their teams. It was like a sporting match, and they turned up to cheer for their side. And the guy who compared the night had a masterstroke, I thought. And after there was question time and so forth, he said, "Well, now we're going to have a vote on the debate." And he said, "But I don't think it's going to help if we just see who cheers loudest, because that just depends on who turned up." He said, "I'd like people who have actually changed or been influenced and their opinions been questioned, or they feel like they've changed their mind a little bit, to put their hand up. But this is not a chance to just have your say. If you put your hand up now, I want you to be about that." And there was, I don't know, 300 people there, something like that. And there was maybe 3 hands went up, 4, something like that. And he went and talked to them, and most of them just wanted to turn on the mic. And he just took the mic off and said, "I told you this is not about this," And so I think in that 350, 100, 350 people, there may have been 1 or 2 people who actually put their hand up to say that they'd reconsidered what they were thinking. It wasn't about, they didn't turn up to think or question. They turned up to cheer, like at a football match. But the people that were cheering for one side or the other were probably not aware of why they were cheering the team they were. And actually, interestingly, Shermer had been a Christian, quite an enthusiastic Christian, and then he switched to atheism. But I think it's interesting that the nature of his belief didn't change, just what he believed. He went from being an evangelistic Christian to being an evangelistic atheist. And he, as a person, and the way he believed what he believed and went about his life remained the same, even though it was like he just said, "I don't like this team, I now go for that team." And he turned up to all the games and cheered just as hard and so forth. So as a person, he remained the same. He just changed what he believed in. And I thought, when I got to this point, I sort of thought, I don't understand how people do form beliefs. It's rather than how might they or how ought they or whatever, what is a reasonable or a rational way to go about it, I just realised I didn't really understand why people believe what they did. So I actually started at that point reading and thinking more about psychology, because I thought it'd be an interesting question to move on to understand why people believe what they do and why they change their mind, and those sorts of questions. But really, I mean, I've continued to think about philosophy, and there's so much more I could go into about what about stuff with Wittgenstein and also others. But really, for me at least, this switch from trying to get knowledge to accepting certainty, that was the big one for me, and it remains so. I still sit in this sort of place. So, not quite sure where I'll go on the next. If I'll probably keep doing a few more. I might go back and look at Berkeley. I might look at some of the other coherentism and foundationalism. Well, there's a lot more in epistemology that I haven't talked about. We haven't really looked much at ethics or philosophy of mind, or there's a whole lot of other things. But my journey up to this point was really primarily about a search for knowledge and being able to say I knew, which I ultimately ended up saying I don't, but I have things that I'm certain about, and that allows me to act. It allows me to be. So I'll see whether this actually hangs together, and whether I publish it or I have to do it again. But at least this has been an interesting journey. All right, bye.